At this point in time, responsibility is closely intertwined with global challenges and sustainability. And it's everybody's responsibility to come up with those solutions, to find a different way of overcoming these challenges.
It's getting better in the sense of more organizations are taking all these matters, these challenges more seriously. I would say in nearly no company, no organization, it's in its genes. Because in its genes, they learned also from the very neoliberal, Tayloristic concept we had in capitalism, maximize profit, maximize shareholder value, and so forth.
And for leaders in complex situations, as I said earlier, you see your organization as a neural network of people with ideas, people with experiences, people with knowledge, who potentially are passionate about what they do and enable leadership to emerge at all different parts of the organization. Close to walking the walk, a second recommendation is to open up and try and become a learning organization. Learn from your people, because that's where the knowledge is.
Learning and sharing knowledge is Wendy Chapple's main purpose. She's a full professor of international business and CSR at the Vienna University of Economics and Business, and will talk about how companies nowadays can tackle the challenge of being sustainable in every possible way and at the same time be profitable. Before we dive right into an interesting and lively discussion, Wendy brought some sounds that describe her best.
What's it got to do with you and birds?
To me, it's natural music, it's nature, and it's a nice way to wake up. It's that kind of peace, and I just love listening to bird songs, particularly blackbirds, but as long as it's not at 4 a.m. or 5 a.m.
I wish people could see us now. Everybody's dancing in the studio. Salsa and Wendy Chapple.
Yes.
Is there a story?
Oh, I just love the music. First time I heard it, I found myself a dance class, and that was it. The love affair started.
But salsa is not very British.
No, but it's fiery.
Let's see how fiery businesses and companies have to be successful and beautiful organizations. We'll dive right into it.
Die Schöne
und das Biest.
Warum schöne Organisationen die Welt verändern. Ein Podcast von
Mari Lang
und Train Consulting Geschäftsführer Lothar Wenzl.
Hello and welcome to another episode of The Beauty and the Beast, again in English, as we have Wendy Chapple from the UK as our guest today. Hi, welcome.
Hello.
Hello, Wendy. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Wendy's an expert in international business, CSR and sustainability. At the moment, she's based in Vienna, where she's a full professor of international business and CSR at the University of Economics and Business, the WU. She used to travel a lot, and her time tends to be divided between meetings, seeing students, creating programs for students, and doing research. And Lothar, I think you are the one who said we have to invite Wendy. Why and what exactly will we focus on for the next 30 minutes?
I mean, if our listeners would see Wendy and experience her, they would immediately know why I invited her. Because she is as fiery and as inspiring as salsa is. But content-wise, I invited her because when I came across her for the first time last fall or so, immediately there was a very, very big bridge between what we do in trying to design, to create, to support organizations to become beautiful organizations for a better world. And two criteria of that are, and we talked about that in our last podcasts, are at the same time being able to balance the challenges out there in the world, social, ecological, economical challenges, with the need to be sustainable, profitable. And as she's not only a teacher but also a researcher in that field and works with a lot of young people, it was the link was very, very clear. Very interested what she says about her research in that field.
Wendy, you work at the Institute of Responsibility and Sustainability in Global Business at the WU. Maybe can you describe what is your main focus?
In our institute, it's the interface between global business, businesses across borders, multinationals, and sustainability and responsibility. All things around sustainability are global challenges. If you think of climate change, if you think of water, human rights, they are all across borders. So what we are looking at is how global business can be more responsible and be part of the solutions to some of these problems.
Corporate social responsibility is something that I think no company today can neglect. Maybe can you give us an insight? How did it all start? Because today it seems very modern. It seems something you have to have as a company, almost like, like an add-on. But the history of CSR is going in another direction.
Yes, well, the history of CSR comes from back in the industrial times. Big industrialists who set up their businesses on principles of philanthropy, but also setting up towns, education, and health for their workers. So it was because at that point there wasn't any infrastructure. So to build a big factory, you needed to provide all those things. But at that time, because they were Quakers, a lot of these big industrialists were from a Quaker background. They had very strong value sets, and so they wanted their workers and their workers' families to be healthy, to have education, and so they took that care quite seriously. And as businesses grew bigger, we moved away from family firms towards corporations, where you had a separation between management and ownership. And that's when CSR started to really get talked about in terms of what are the responsibilities of a manager. Because up to that point, it was the owners who decided what happened to the business, but you had these other people running the organization. So this is where what is the responsibility of a business person started to emerge. But that has kind of evolved and taken some big jumps recently, I would say. The responsibility of business is seen as no longer how you spend your money after you've done what you've done, but it's taking responsibility for everything that you do and taking that lens to look across your whole value chain to understand what the impacts are, what are the implications, and taking a responsible and duty-based approach, but also thinking in terms of ethics, virtue ethics. What is the right thing to do? And I would say now, at this point in time, responsibility is closely intertwined with global challenges and sustainability, because those are the big challenges we're facing in society now. And it's everybody's responsibility to come up with those solutions, to find a different way of overcoming these challenges, to find different ways of making things, to find solutions so that people and the environment do not get harmed. The leading companies in this area really see it as their kind of central core DNA that they are going to find a solution.
Lothar, the companies you work with Train Consulting, how do they deal with CSR? What do they focus on? And maybe I have to mention that we are sitting in the podcast studio. It's really raining very heavily, and we're in the middle of a thunderstorm. And actually, it's something that also, it's a sign of our time, no? That also when we talk about businesses and companies, there is always something you have to react on, like we have to do right now. So maybe if we talk about corporate social responsibility, what do companies that you work with, Lothar, focus on? What do they deal with? What are their hardships maybe with this topic?
I mean, there is an ongoing, I would call it struggle, both within the managers, the leaders, the entrepreneurs, the owners, and every person in the world with all those topics. I think it was a few weeks ago when the supply chain law, the European supply chain law, passed the European Parliament, which was a big one. So we finally have become severe and clear regulations about the topic. And I find it immensely important that this is coming along. And this is a great achievement we already get from the European Union. At the same time, there is a lot of organizations we are also working with that were calling for such regulations in order to bring more fairness into the economy. which I consider to be one of the most important acts. And there are other organizations that still just want to do business, want to maximize profits. So we have everything out there in the world with all the challenges that are addressed from the critical side. We lose our advantages in the global economy because other continents do not have those heavy regulations. So that's the ongoing struggle every organization is facing at the moment. And the organizations are struggling at the same time for younger generation, for bringing even people into their companies. And this is the cocktail we are faced with and they are faced with. Yet I see a lot of, or more role models, new role models of organizations coming up who really want to address this also from an ethical and moral standpoint, which I also find important.
We heard already that companies have CSR in their DNA. That's actually something, I think, how it should be. And then we also hear about greenwashing, gender washing and stuff like that, where companies just use CSR as some kind of nice gimmick that they also have because it's en vogue. How do you see it with the companies you work with? I mean, they're more open, I guess, because they want to change something.
Also here, I see it from an evolution standpoint, so it's getting better in the sense of more organizations are taking all these matters, these challenges more seriously. I would say in nearly no company, no organization, it's in its genes. Because in its genes, they learned also from the very neoliberal, terroristic concept we had in capitalism, maximize profit, maximize shareholder value, and so forth. Yet, a lot changes already. And we see organizations really struggling for it heavily. At the same time, the need for profit, for shareholder value, for maximizing profits is still there. It has not gone away. So we have to, and that's a question of complexity, we have to deal with it at the same time.
So Wendy, from a researcher point of view, maybe how can companies deal with all this complexity Lothar was talking about?
It seems that things become more and more complex over time. We have several crises back-to-back, interconnected, and I think from a researcher perspective, complexity is all about the interconnectedness and understanding the impacts and how things influence each other. It's also, from a theory point of view, when you look at complexity leadership, it's actually leaders being comfortable, this is what the theory says, with the uncertainty. I think traditionally, leadership and the way that it's been taught, or business in general has been taught, has been to simplify, to put things into boxes and make sense of it that way. But I think things have moved to the point where it's actually understanding the interconnections and being okay with the uncertainty, and at times of rapid change, being okay with not knowing all of the answers. But for a leader, it's enabling the knowledge within your organization, because if you've got a diverse set of people within your company, they've all got knowledge, they're all doing different jobs. It's enabling those people to share their knowledge into the neural network and letting solutions emerge. So in complexity leadership, you don't have a situation where you can force a change. And from a CEO perspective, we want this to happen, it's going to happen this way. What complexity suggests is you enable conditions and space in your organization for solutions to emerge. And to enable that to happen, you need space, conversations, trust, but also valuing people's opinions within your organization to surface innovative solutions. Because when you've got intense complexity, one person doesn't know all the answers. One person doesn't know what's happening over here in our subsidiary in Hungary. One person doesn't know what's happening in the value chain in Africa. So I would say a leader is not an all-knowing controller. A leader is an enabler that creates the space and allows things to emerge. And once things emerge, to let them grow and amplify those ideas. You can drop seeds of emergence, theory goes. So you can give resources, you can give incentives or direct people to certain kind of issues or challenges or questions, but you certainly can't control it. But it's using the knowledge and seeing your organization as a living knowledge neuro network to come up with those solutions.
We've talked about this in the podcast already, and it always comes down to one topic, which is education. And to me, it always seems somehow like a contradiction. Like when I listen to you, how leaders should be today, that actually how we are brought up, and also children today, and how our school system functions, we are controlled, we have to obey, we have to think in a silo-wise. So how can we, when we then are grown-ups and a workforce, and then maybe the really good ones become leaders, how can you deal with this contradiction?
I think what I do in my classes with my students is enable them to jump into the complexity. So all of my classes, I always have you're going to have to trust me on this journey. They get thrown into very complicated situations which are multi-level, from global all the way down to local. And I give them a toolkit to start making sense of it. Not simplify it, but look at the interconnections and look at the spaces where interventions could enable solutions. So what I see as a way of overcoming this is enabling people to experience it in a safe space, but also give them a toolkit to, rather than run and hide and just anchor on one part of the problem, to actually start to see the patterns. And then you start to get the creativity, the innovation. It needs a different way of thinking. That each of these challenges are all interconnected, but when you see that connection, that's that point of innovation. That's where you start to create, how can we solve this? What kind of thing would that look like? And this is where things like design thinking or kind of using innovation techniques to turn the world upside down. Think out, I hate this term, but think out of the box. What could the world look like? And so things like visioning, things like scenarios, future. What could that world look like? And let's, if we work back, what could we put in place that could maybe enable that direction of travel? And so it's having confidence to jump in there rather than, okay, well, we're going to look at this little bit because that's something that I understand. But it's to actually look between levels, from the global, national, regional, local, different parts of the organization, and to be able to start to look at the interconnections and the long-term view. The students that I've had, by the end of it, they're like, wow, I never thought I would come to this. And I've just finished a class on systems of governance, which is all around the different mechanisms that bring about change for sustainability. And we did a case on artisanal mining in Kenya. And there is a stakeholder forum in Kenya set up by an academic from Nottingham University. It's bringing together all the actors in the local region to come up with more sustainable mining practices. My students, they went through the case and they analysed it, and in the end they presented to the artisanal miners in Kenya. And the artisanal miners in Kenya said, wow, can we have the slides? We're going to take some of that away. And actually you argued that so confidently, it feels like you're here. And these were students in a classroom in Vienna who'd never stepped foot. But that's part of the thing, to understand the different levels, but also to understand the cultural context, what's happening on the ground, what's the root cause. And they did a great job. I was very proud of them, and they were very proud of themselves.
It's beautiful. I would love to have studied like that. And I studied on the VU as well, but it was not like that, mostly not.
But I guess maybe the way you work now with leaders, with your company Train Consulting, might be like that.
It's pretty similar, I would guess. I would assume as well, but I would like to comment on what you said, education. It all comes down to education, or I would say it all comes down how our society, our life is built. We live in a divided society. Departments, subjects. In school, there are different subjects divided from each other. It's the same in organizations. We have departments, divisions. Instead of, as you said, finding the interconnections, bringing diversity, and that's the kind of diversity, into a system or organized differently. And yet this is a very challenging thing to do. I'm not saying if we do it from our work at Train Consulting, come to us, then it's very easy. It is hard work. Yet it pays off, as you said. I'm very proud of them, and they are very proud of themselves, and that's what we see in our work as well. This is one of the main virtues and main challenges, and also main tasks of leadership, is to frame a space where people can see the relations, the interconnections, but also relate to each other and doing things together, because complexity can only be tackled in that way. But that needs, and I would therefore call one of the most important leadership virtues or leadership tasks, leadership is an act of kindness or even of love, and not of anything like heroic actions or whatever. So as soon as we start to care for others, start to care for the organization, start to care for ourselves, and start to care for the world, we start to lead, and people will follow us much easier, much more energetically. And once people experience that, the healing can start.
Love and business, it also sounds like a contradiction. Leading and love, and then talking about economy and business and money. How does that all come together, and how do students react when you put words like love and beautiful organizations into this whole spectrum you're teaching?
The students, they do care. And so for the students that take my course, this notion of making a difference, finding solutions, but also trying to understand others, say with the mining case, really getting into the lives of those miners, it really resonated with them. They do care. They care passionately about the future. They do care about what's happening.
The younger generation, especially the Generation Z, which is often talked about, they are born in 1995 to 2010. It's often said that they want meaningful lives, they want jobs where they matter, where they can change something, they want to be authentic, they want their companies to be authentic. Is that something you experience with your students as well?
Oh yes, they can smell out companies which are not being authentic.
What would that mean? If a company is not authentic, how would you know?
It's all rhetoric.
Because I'm not Gen Z.
It's all rhetoric, it's all the buzzwords, but when you look behind in terms of actions, there's nothing behind it. So when it's saying things because you're trying to placate, saying things because everybody else is saying it, but there isn't the action, or there's a disconnect.
It's interesting because you were asking about the Gen Z. It's the same for all people in organizations. You said they can smell out non-authentic organizations. I like that term. It's the same for all the other people working in organizations. When we see that more than 80% of the people are disengaged in the organizations around the globe, we know what the status of organizations at the moment is. And the Gen Z, of course, has more options because they are not yet integrated into organizations, which maybe older generations do not have so much. But I think everyone can smell out authenticity. If you had suggestions or recommendations for organizations, knowing your younger generation, what would you recommend? What are the 3 most important recommendations you would give in the context of responsibility, authenticity, what we talked about now?
Walk the walk. If you say you're doing something, do it. Because I think as the first set of people that get disillusioned are the people that work for an organization which knows what's being said isn't happening. And that's an issue because it delegitimizes what the company's trying to do. Everybody just doesn't believe it doesn't value it. So if you say you're going to do something, do it. Don't hide it. Be very clear. Communicate it, but make it part of all of your communicate. This is what we're trying to do. Be clear when it's not working. Because also the companies I respect the most is when they've put something in traction, say a new transformation or strategic change, and it hasn't quite worked. They put their hands up and say, this has happened, this is why, but this is what we're going to do about it. Rather than carrying on pretending that it is working. So it's that authenticity in communication, in measurement, in terms of how it's framed, because unless you measure these kinds of things, you don't learn. And I think close to walking the walk, a second recommendation is to open up and try and become a learning organization. And this was our strategy that we put in place 3 years ago. No, we're not going to deviate. We're not going to listen. No, learn from your people, have the learning loops within the organization, because that's where the knowledge is. And for leaders in complex situations, as I said earlier, you're seeing your organization as a neural network of people with ideas, people with experiences, people with knowledge, who potentially are passionate about what they do and enable leadership to emerge at all different parts of the organization. I think when there's complexity, you need distributed leadership throughout, where people take initiatives. It's that kind of bottom-up change where people feel that they are enabled, they feel supported, they feel listened to. So I would say for good leadership, enable people to lead. They might not have the title, but they certainly are able to, and giving people those chances and those skills to lead locally, to come up with ideas.
You just said something very interesting. Even if they haven't got the title, they should lead and enable. We're in Austria, where titles are very important. And I often hear in companies that people, they get into the role of being a leader, they enable, but then they don't have the title, and that's what's frustrating, because they want to have the title because it means more money, more status, and So how do we deal with that?
I would say if people feel valued, if people feel that they can make a change, if people feel listened to, that gives them purpose. And so it's kind of switching it around. Leadership is not just a title, it's actually everybody. That might not be a solution, but it's enabling people to have a voice and to lead. And I think for people, we're talking about Gen Z, and having a purpose is so important. And that's, I think, the re-emphasis. Actually, this is what I care about, and this is what I want to happen, and these are my ideas. And for the leader to listen, and listen deeply. And I think that changes the dynamic in the workplace, and it flattens it out. And I think for companies to be reactive and proactive, to lots of things, to be agile, all of these things that are seen as good things for organizations, you need that less of a hierarchy and being waiting to told. You need that responsiveness and things to the company to move in tune with the outside environment.
I have experienced a lot of companies that are the opposite of agile. They are very rigid and very slow in everything they do and in changing things. And there I see it as very critical if you say, okay, let's enable people to become leaders, because then the frustration is very big.
Yeah, I can relate to that, because I would have two different answers. The one answer is the younger generation steps into organizations. The younger, well-educated generation stepping in, and titles or position power doesn't matter to them. They just go in and say, who are you to tell me that? Do you have a good argument around? Fine. If not, my argument counts. But in a lot of organizations, of course, we have older or more rigid cultures, and when you need to change it, that's a completely different story. There, one of the tasks of leadership is to change that, and you need to legitimize that, to really tell the people and design frames, spaces where this needs to be. For example, to step back as a leader and overuse, I don't know, you tell me. Or to have decision-making processes where everyone is in one way or the other, not everyone, but more people are involved and need to make a stance and need to address their opinion and need to bring their recommendations on. But this has to be much more designed for, as with the younger generation. This is the change what we need to do. And this has a lot to do with role modeling by the ones who are at the moment seen as the leaders. And this is a completely different angle. But the younger generation, I love them. They just come in. I'm 57, nearly 50 or 56 now. And they come in and tell me their worldview and say, this is bullshit.
I know a lot of leaders who don't like the younger generation, and especially this fact about them.
Yeah, it's a struggle. And it's, of course, it's not easy to get that much, much younger people stepping up on eye-to-eye level to you and tell you what they think. But let's be honest, and that's not always comfortable, also not for me.
For change, you need tension. That's another thing about complexity theory. In a system for things to change, you need the the tension in there. And actually, the point of tension is where change happens.
Exactly, and I have a lot of examples about that, because in a lot of change process, people who are in the organization, which is changed, come up to me, even the leaders come up, but what if the resistances come up and dissent comes up? And I always tell them, great, that's the proof that something is changing, is shifting, that's what you want, right? But then be prepared to go with that. And of course, that's quite often uncomfortable. Holding that uncertainty, being able to stand that, these are the new virtues of leadership, not knowing what's to be done.
Lothar, you asked Wendy just before what her 3 top recommendations would be for leaders and also to get the younger generation in their companies. Now I would like to ask you.
I mean, I can relate to what Wendy said a lot. I would go back to what I said before. Really be aware and think deeply about it and really feel deeply in yourself what you really care about as a leader. And the second one would be, where do you really want to go with this organization? What do you want to bring into the world? And what do you want to give back to the world? Because we all get so much out of this world, and not only talking about the depletion of resources on this planet, but also we get so much. What do you give back and what do you want to bring into this world? For me, 2 key questions. And the third one is overuse, I don't know.
We started with the definition of corporate social responsibility and also talked a little bit about the history. And now in the end, I'd like to ask you, Wendy, if CSR is still a term that's actually fitting for today, or do we need another term?
There are a lot of different terms which are in the same space. So CSR historically was the term used. Then they dropped the S because it was associated with more social and philanthropy, so it became corporate responsibility. Then it's evolved to drop the corporate because all organizations have responsibility. It's not a corporate thing only. So I would say responsibility is the underlying thing, but there's also things associated with that, such as purpose. And in our institute, we're building a whole stream of research on what is organizational purpose. And so that links to values, that links to care, that links to actually what are we trying to bring into the world. So how does purpose influence organizations, not just at a leadership level, but throughout the organization? So I would see that as a key term here.
And it was interesting listening to, we dropped the S out of CSR, social, huh? And I hear that a lot, talking to managers, for example. Now, we are not a social institution, we are here for making profits. And I say, really? 50% is about talking and taking care of relationships. So how can it not be a social institution? And so we should bring that back on much more into organizations.
It's all about connections.
Which is a very nice term for the end here, because also these talks in this podcast are about connection and relationship and us as humans, because we're always humans, no matter if we are at the workplace or we're a leader or we're private. And that's why we always start with something very private from our guest, and we also end with something very private. And this is, I'd like to ask you, what is your main value in life that you would want to leave on our table now?
Define value. What do you mean? That can mean so many different things.
How would you define it?
I was very clear that this would come back. Bounce back to you.
I'm the one asking the question.
Of course.
I would say if I was going to boil down through my ethical principles, fairness and justice. I want to improve things. I want to constantly looking for solutions. So I think for me, I would love to have a positive impact in terms of how businesses navigate these issues, help businesses on that journey, help individuals on that journey, create new knowledge that will enable that to happen. So that would be like what I would like to leave in terms of value to the world.
It's so nice because you're a researcher, and I think you're the first person here who's asking me what I mean with value. So what I learned today is that never stop asking questions. Lothar, what's your value that you gain from this talk today?
Right, what I see is, and it's no surprise, but it was touching to see or to hear in this talk, is how much our scientists obviously care. Maybe it's the awareness of everything, and we are all interconnected.
Thank you very much for being our guest, Wendy.
It's my pleasure.
And thank you for listening. That's all for this episode. If you liked the show, please drop us a line and share your thoughts with us. You will find the contacts in the show notes. And please make sure to come back again when we have another international guest with whom we'll talk about what organizations need to become more beautiful and at the same time staying profitable. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye. Das war Die Schöne
Und das Biest.
Ein Podcast von
Mari Lang
und Train Consulting Geschäftsführer Lothar Wenzl.